Hi, I'm Liz Rust. I'm the director of the Regional Housing Services Office. So I wanted to start with just a slide to show you what the Regional Housing Services is. It's a municipal, yes?
Turn down the lights a little bit, start with you.
Oh, I think I can do that.
The Regional Housing Services Office is a collaboration of 8 towns in this area. So you can see Acton, Bedford, Concord, Lexington, Lincoln, Sudbury, Wayland, and Weston. And it's based out of Concord, and we have a staff of 4 part-time housing specialists, and we provide all sorts of housing administrative services to the member towns. We do monitoring, we help the planning departments, and we do things like this, so to help the town with the housing production plan. In particular, in our office, we've been working on the, well, maybe I just advance a little bit here. So you can ask any questions about the RHSO, but that was just a slight, a small introduction to them. We've been working on the needs assessment part of the housing production plan. And as Nancy mentioned, a housing production plan. And here we use these initials, HPP. And if you've been involved with housing, you know there's many initials. There's a lot of jargon, which is why we put together this glossary. And glad to answer any questions, but this might be helpful to define some of these terms. But the HPP has 3 components to it. The needs assessment, where we look at all the different sources of data, and I think we've used 18 sources in putting together. So some of it's from the census, some of it's from Acton Building Department, so, and everything in between. We've gotten individual sales from MLS, the multiple listing service, for the last decade, each one, and so we can calculate median prices and all sorts of data. So it's a pretty thorough data analysis. And then with that complete, so it's actually a long, it's probably like a 40-page document or something at this point. We've highlighted some of the charts and observations for presentation here in discussion, and then moving into the goals and strategies portion of the project. The goals are the higher level strategic objectives, and then the strategies are the implementation, more action-oriented steps. A housing production plan is a regulated process by DHCD. So it has a very specific, not so much format, but a set of requirements that it must address. You must compare your needs and your data to surrounding areas. You must have a meeting like this and obtain community feedback. And you must demonstrate how you will reach a 10% affordable housing inventory. And I'm going to assume that many people know what that is, and we can talk more about that in the breakout sessions after the fact. But on the higher level, it engages the community in the housing discussion and identifies the housing needs, as we talked about, and then creates a safe harbor if the municipality demonstrates sufficient progress towards their affordable housing production. So I had to really take a deep breath before saying that. That's a big mouthful. So safe harbor is a term, it's pretty technical, but I think it's important to this forum, where you are able to deny or not accept 40B projects in town. So the HPP offers an up to maximum of a 2-year safe harbor, and that's one of the benefits that you might accrue by doing a housing production plan. So it's really the community involvement and engagement, the identification of housing needs, and the potential to create this safe harbor. So in general, that's what we see communities really looking for in a housing production plan. And I wanted to mention that safe harbor is a benefit that Acton has taken advantage of already. So I think it's achieved that. So here's a little bit more of the jargon. So I'm not really going to spend too much time here, but the term affordable housing, like we sometimes get stuck right there, like we can't really move past, like what does that actually mean? And I think of it as lowercase a is housing that is affordable to a household's income where you would spend 30% on housing costs. That's generally what the industry or the nation or the experts would think of as, is it a appropriate, I don't know if that's the right word, amount that you should spend on housing. If you go to a bank for a mortgage, for example, they'll use a 30% as kind of a benchmark if you're looking to buy something. Like, is it going to be more than 30% of your income? Maybe they'll use 38, maybe this, but it's kind of a benchmark. So that's kind of a lowercase a. And then we talk about uppercase affordable housing, where there are permanent, or I don't know if permanent, there are deed restrictions or restrictions on the property. And those restrictions tend to define the eligibility of who can live there in terms of their income. Maybe there's restrictions on the rents and the resale price going forward, how much it would cost to stay in that unit. So that's a lowercase affordable and uppercase affordable. So that might help, because sometimes people intermix those terms. We talk a lot about area median income, and this is how the income is measured for eligibility for all the programs. And this is published annually by HUD down in Washington for every metropolitan statistical area in the country. And Acton is part of the Boston Quincy, that's actually the next slide, right? So I'll just wait on that. And then we have the subsidized housing inventory. It's the measure towards that 10%. And I'm just going to leave it at that. It's more complicated than you would ever think it really is. And I'm just going to say, refer to the handout for more details, and I can answer any specific questions on that. So here we are. So this is the AMI page. So again, it's the standard used in most housing programs. And what they use is incomes below 80% of the area median income. So that's generally the term that you'll see. And that's what you need to be in order to be eligible for this SHI, subsidized housing inventory, to count to the 10%. So it's very specific, and that generally Section 8 uses the same limit. Many housing programs use this. And Acton is part of the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy metropolitan statistical area. Yes?
Is this presentation on a website?
That's a good question. I was meant to start with that. This presentation will be on the town website tomorrow. Right? Yes? Yes. Okay. And so there's 100 municipalities in these 5 counties and even 3 New Hampshire towns. And you can see that map there, right? So it's really it's a big area. And the Acton, we see here that the Acton median household income, just in Acton is 137. But when we look at the AMI for the area, we use this 113 number. So again, this is pretty detailed, but just to see, because sometimes people say, well, the area median income in Acton is this, why are you using this number? So, and then when we look at eligibility to go into housing, we look at it by household size, and you can see down at the bottom the income limits that vary by household size. So again, reference information. So Acton, as Nancy mentioned, so Acton has a current housing production plan, and it does expire in August of this year. And it's a pretty long process to put one together, to have this meeting, to assimilate the input and prepare the goals and strategies. The plans are to be adopted by the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, and then submitted to DHCD. And so the schedule for this makes sure that Acton's plan will not expire. So a new plan would be available before the expiration date here. As I mentioned before, the housing production plan was certified, which is the term to create that safe harbor. That's a certified housing production plan, generates the safe harbor. And it was certified in last July with the permitting of the Avalon Phase 2. And going forward, There are future opportunities for Acton to achieve the 10% threshold. And these are future opportunities. You never know what's going to happen in the future and when these things are going to happen, and is it really going to be the numbers that we think they are, right? A lot of unknowns, but the powder mill development is circulating its proposal, as well as the 446 Mass Ave and the 364 Main Street. So both of those are projects that have circled around in town, proposals generated, and some support and some, I think there's probably information maybe on the town website about these projects, but certainly they're not new news here. Yes.
Do those projects do they have to run simultaneously? Can you do powder mill for 2 years, even though the other two are built?
So there are many, as we talk about these in detail, there's many scenarios depending on the timing of the projects, when the new census comes up, when the projects get permitted, when the building permits get issued, what year is it, what's the other project doing at those times. So there's many things that could happen. And that's why it said here, future opportunities to reach the 10%. Or to certify this housing production plan.
Well, see, I'd like them to be really separate regardless of when they come, so you have 6 years safe harbor.
No, safe harbors are really a 2-year safe harbor. And so I think we all have certain hopes, and you can put those right here. What do you hope the housing production plan will achieve? And you might say, I hope it achieves a 6-year safe harbor. Right, like that's, but we don't know when these projects will be permitted and when their building permits would be issued and what year that will be. And those are sort of the key things. So we have, with all of this work, we have what happens on paper and then what happens in the real world, right? The 10% is about the real world. Like what's really happening out there in terms of the developer, their ability to fund the project, get financing, get their permits, and build the project. That's what really demonstrates the 10%, or the getting it on the SHI. So I hope that helped. And here's a little bit more information about the SHI. And here in Station 2, you could see that when you're going through, and you'll see how the stations will work coming up. So right now there's 657 units on the SHI, which turns into 7.75%, which has really increased a lot since I've started working with Acton. I think Acton was around like 4.5, maybe when joined the RHSO. And so of that, I don't even know if I can read this right. I think it's about 80% are rental units and 20% are ownership. And some of that has to do with the nuances of how things are counted for the SHI. In rental developments, all units will count towards your 10% as long as a minimum of 25% are affordable. So again, a lot of detail there. And then the restricted rentals are broken out here by age restricted, specialized, and no age restriction. And our project schedule. So, as I mentioned, we started with the data gathering in September, analyzing those 18 sources of information, and some of them are listed here. Then we're in the community engagement phase, where there were some interviews done. We had some focus groups in December, maybe? I don't know, November? I think November. And then we did a survey directly after that in December. We took the holiday off, and then we got ready for this session here. And so this will really conclude, I think, the community engagement portion of the project, and then moving into putting the information together. This casually calls it review and adoption, but there's really a lot of writing and revising and sort of detail working underneath that. So Okay, so now we'll do some charts and slides. So it's a lot of information, right? So see how I do. And all of these, I want to say, are also on these boards. So I'm going to go through this very quickly, and then you can look at them in more detail up close. So the first thing is population. So you can see the chart up on the upper right, and you can see the big uptick there. So between 1950 and 1960, 100% increase in population. Between 1960 and 1970, another 100% increase in population. So that was the big growth in Acton. And now we're in that sort of top part, and it's a stabilizing line. So 8%, last year was also 8%, or since 2010. So is that right? No, I'm sorry, 2000 to 2010 was 8%, and then 2010 to 2018, so stabilized. On this bottom left is a racial composition. So you can see the white and then the Asian, and those are sort of inverted. And you can see the blue line is the year 2000, 2010 is the orange, and then, I don't know, is that gold or green, whatever it is the 2018. We're able to use the 2018 data in this analysis. And then the population by age. So again, it's a lot of information. What I take away from this is between 2010 and 18, which is the gray and the orange, they're almost the same. So that, there's been some change, but they're very consistent. In looking at the population, about 27% of all Acton households are low, moderate income. So, yes.
How is that defined?
That's defined based on 80% or less of the area median income. And this slide is about household income. So 65% of all the households make over $100,000. And who's making less than 60? 41% of the seniors, 14% of householders aged 45 to 64, and 18% of householders aged 25 to 44. And again, yes?
What is the difference in definition of household and housing unit?
So a household is the people, and a housing unit is the building.
Okay, so we have different numbers in Acton for household versus housing unit. How does that work?
I'm going to let Laura talk about that.
Well, so there are some vacant housing units.
You could stand up.
Yeah, so the housing units is usually a little bit bigger because there are a number of vacant units.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So Laura works in the RHSO and has done really all the data behind these, and so she's really the expert on all of those 18 sources of data. And did we switch? Yep. So we affectionately call this the gray chart, and we can see over time how the sales of homes in Acton have changed in pricing. So the black is less than 400,000, and I guess really there's so much to say about this, but really in 2010, 45% of the sales were less than 500,000, and that number drops to 19% in 2019. So, and this comes from actual MLS sales. And this is a little bit on renters and owners. You might be surprised to know that younger and older populations are more renters than owners. But actually 2/3 of the households under 35 are renters. And then by age 45, that really drops to 20%. And then the bottom chart there is about cost burden. Cost burden is when I talked about affordable lowercase of 30% on housing costs. If you're paying over 30%, that's called your cost burdened. So that's kind of a measure of how affordable it is in the home that you're in. So you could see that renters, which are the top section, and it's really hard to see what this is, right? So the pale yellow is severely cost burdened, where you're spending more than 50% of your income, and the lighter blue is 30% of your income, just regular cost burden. And then the darker blue is you can afford where you're living. So renters are twice as more likely to be cost burdened. And this chart talks about housing affordability. So what can we say here? So the two sections on the left are in general, the income is going to be the blue, and the housing price is going to be the orange. So the two on the left talk about that if you're at that 80% of AMI, that affordable income level that we talked about, what those prices are. The third chart there is the Acton's median income, the 137. That's the median income in Acton. That translates to a sales price of $533. And we know that the median sales price in Acton is actually $635. So if you're making the median income, you can't afford the median sales price. So it's just a lot of numbers and data to show that. I think that, am I doing the slide? Yes? No, I can do this. I see coming up is the switch. I mentioned before the community engagement. Right, so there we go. So 3 focus groups held in November, approximately 25 people. And then the survey responses. So I think we're all very happy that so many people have come here, and hopefully you were able to participate with the survey or some of these other forums. Yes, so thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Barry.
Hi everyone, I'm Barry Fradkin. I'm working with James Golson, the consultant working with RHSO, and I just wanted to give you a little information about the survey results. How many people here actually took the survey online? Okay, good, so quite a few of you. All right, so here's some results. Starting out with the demographics, 754 total responses, 86% were residents. 89% of those were white or Caucasian, with 7.6% Asian. 580 of those who responded were homeowners, so that's 89%, and 60 were renters. And then looking at the age distribution of all the people who responded, you can see it's pretty, standard distribution, centered around the 45 to 54 age range. That was the one with the most people. Just a couple people 85 and older, and maybe one person under 18. And then looking at how long people have lived in Acton who took the survey, they actually are pretty well distributed as well. So going from less than 5 years in green to 30 or more years in orange. So looking at some of the specific responses, one of the highest voted for barriers to owning or renting in Acton, and this was mostly from people who don't already live in Acton, was the high cost of housing. In terms of household characteristics from the residents, 41% of households have more than 4 or more people, and 48% have children under 18 living with them. And then the top 3 reasons that people chose to live in Acton were the quality of the public schools, the safety, and the type or size of home that they could afford when they moved here. Looking at the housing needs and preferences, many people said that they'd like to be able to age in the community, so live in their home or stay in Acton as they get older, retire, etc. Looking at some of the top needs related to the elderly and disabled residents, some people highlighted the need for home-based services to allow people to continue to live in their home, also making modifications to homes to make them more accessible, and having more accessible housing units as well. In terms of more popular options for future housing, we had a range of options, but some of the most voted for were senior age-restricted housing, single-family, specifically single-family detached homes, accessible units, and also houses on smaller lots. So those might still be single-family, but they're on a smaller lot. And then some of the less popular options for future housing were luxury apartments and multifamily housing with 20 or more units. And you can see a few examples of recent housing developments on the right side here. Some additional feedback we collected. People highlighted over the next decade, some of the most important things they would like to have are a diverse mix of housing options, different sizes, types, and costs. Also more accessible housing, as they said before, and housing for families with children. Some people thought it was less important to have houses on smaller lots, housing options mixed into commercial areas, and housing for younger people without family. And then some of the questions, this is just one question in particular, had over 130 comments, so there's a lot of details in there that we've sorted through, and we've looked at some of the patterns and some of the feedback to see where there's certain issues that come up more often. All right, and then I'll hand this over to Jen, who's going to give you a little more information about this process and where we're going tonight with the open house.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Jen Golson. I'm a planning consultant, and I'm just really thrilled to see so many people here. You know, I can't tell you how many of these we do where we get 10 or 15 people to come out, and you think, gosh, don't people care about what happens in their community? And I'm just so pleased, and I know that you must have very diverse opinions, which is great. But I just want to remind everyone that even though housing tends to be feel very divisive and scary many times, you know, we come into these meetings and people are anxious or nervous or mad. I just want to say that the thing I mostly love about working with communities like this, where you can get a great turnout for a meeting, is that even though you have different opinions, I'm sure of it, you also have one thing that's in common. Does anybody know what it is? I live in Acton, because actually not all of you do. Does anybody know what the one thing is that I'm about to say? A house. You probably all have a house to live in. Is that fair to say? I don't know if that's true, but it's maybe a guess, a good guess. That's not what I was going to say, though. Does anybody have another guess? Yeah, okay. Did someone hear me say that before? I say that a lot because when I get a really good turnout and I can tell that people are feeling strongly about things and that they may not agree, I do like to just point out that you're here because you all care about this community. And I think that's something really great to have in common. So I just applaud you all for being here and being the kind of community that can actually come together and talk about these things, even though they're hard to talk about. So we are going to get you into these exercises, but I just wanted to give you some examples. We spend a lot of time working in communities that are suburban or small towns, and that they really are concerned about the type of housing, the type of new housing, the look of the housing, the fit of the housing, and how appropriate it is for the things that they really love about their community. They don't want to see their town change drastically to the point where they can't recognize it anymore. So what we've done is we've collected some examples from other communities that you may or may not think are good examples. I happen to think they fit in pretty well to the communities that they're in, but it just gives you a sense of the types of different housing and how it can look. And part of the point of showing you these is that I believe strongly that the density is less important than the design of a development in terms of how it fits into the neighborhood, into the community. And if you think very carefully about the design of how something is placed on the site, how it relates to other buildings around it, you can even have a multi-family building in a single-family neighborhood that actually looks like it fits in. And it doesn't happen all the time. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think that it is possible. And so I just have some examples, and I just wanted to show you some of these you may already be familiar with. This one happens to be in New Hampshire. I know you do have co-housing here, though, isn't that right? What is the name of that development? I can't remember. New View, that's right. This particular co-housing example is in New Hampshire. It's in Peterborough. Is anybody familiar with this other example of co-housing in Peterborough, New Hampshire? Well, I just think it's designed in a beautiful way. It's really a cluster development with open space farmland all around it, but they're tightly clustered homes, and it fits in very well to this particular rural sort of atmosphere of this community. You can see it's also has some renewable energy. It has solar panels on it. This other one here, this one's in Carlisle. Some of you actually may be familiar with this one. So this one's in Carlisle. This is 26 units of senior affordable rental homes. And they designed this, it's called Benfield Farms. They designed it to try to look like a barn, a big barn, really. There's more to it than just this, but they were trying to think of how can this kind of architecture fit in to our community in a way that we could have multifamily in our community and it doesn't stick out like it doesn't belong here. This example is from Wayland. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this one. It's Oxbow, Wayland. They took a former federally owned Nike missile site, they cleaned it up, and built this 16-unit family. They did more than just build these units. There's also recreation, lots of things going on that site, but it's a 16-unit family affordable ownership homes. So the other one I showed you was rental for seniors. This one is ownership for families, and this has won all sorts of awards and things like that as well. This one is in Amherst, and some of these buildings are actually old farm buildings, and others are newer buildings to look like buildings that could have been on this farm, but they actually weren't, and now it's all housing. I don't know how many units are in this, but this is a multifamily development basically, but it's designed to look like a farm, and I don't think I coined this term, but I call this style farmplex. This one, you might be familiar, this one's in Concord. Lots of people show this one. Concord Riverwalk. It's not affordable, by the way, not even close to affordable, but it could have been. But this one is an example of cottage style. And there's a number of other examples around the state, and this particular one has gotten a lot of recognition, but basically the cottage style is very small, compact, single-family homes, but they're really clustered tight in to create a very walkable neighborhood. And I don't think the Concord Riverwalk was actually a cluster development that preserved open space. Somebody, Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can do a cottage-style development that is also a cluster development. And we've worked with other communities that are very interested in changing their zoning for open space residential zoning or cluster zoning. It goes by a few different names, but basically it's zoning to preserve as much of the open space and then take the homes and bring them in tighter so that you're not developing in a very sprawl sort of pattern. And so cottage housing is one type of architecture you could use to do this cluster open space conservation development. You can do other housing styles too, but I just wanted to give you that as an example. So that's just to start to give you your mind thinking. You'll see that we use some of these terms for housing types in the map at Station 6 for you to really comment on. But I'm going to talk about what each of these stations are around the room and what we're going to do for the rest of the evening until about, when you're done, you can let me know. We can end early if you want, but we would go till about 8:45 or so if you need that much time. My guess is you won't need that much time. And so if you are done, the best thing you can do, I'll probably ask you a few times if you're done, but the best thing you can do is just sit down again, and then I'll know, well, people are actually done. We don't need to wait till 8:45. But what we'd like to do at the end is just hear from the staff and volunteers, your town officials who are staffing the different stations. We want to just hear a little bit about what people talked about at those stations. They'll grab a few of the Post-it notes and say, these are some things that people talked about. So we'll have some quick report outs, very short, at the very end of the night. And you're welcome to either stay that long if you want to, you're very welcome to. But also the way we design this is that if you prefer to just give your comments and leave, That's completely socially acceptable, and we want you to feel welcome to do that as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these things are and what the kind of questions we're asking of you for your input. So there are 6 stations. The first one, many of you already participated in here. Raise your hand if you already put a sticker on the map saying where you live or where you work. Okay, so many of you, but not all of you. So the ones that didn't raise your hand, that would be a good place to start. Although all of you didn't raise your hand, shouldn't start there because then there'll be a huge line. But just know that if you didn't raise your hand, you should make your way over there at some point, because we'd love to see how is the distribution of residents who showed up here tonight. Are they all kind of clustered in the same neighborhood? Or did we get a representation from a variety of neighborhoods in Acton? And we also would like and I'm actually going to go through these in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me just give you the overview first, then I'm going to deep dive into each station. So the overview is, there's this station here, the where you live, where you work, but we also ask what is at the heart of the matter for housing for you. The second station is housing production plan information. This is where you can find out about the subsidized housing inventory and the numbers. Station 3, actually, Barry, would you mind being like a little Vanna White and just showing like where each station is? Okay, so 1 was over there, you know that already. This is 2, very good. 3 is here, and 3 is, hold on, don't go to 4 yet. Okay, so 3 is about demographic trends, and Liz went over some of these things like aging population and change in demographics in terms of Asian population and white population and population growth. And then the next one, Station 4, is about affordability characteristics. So that gives you the information around sales prices and what different income levels can afford. The next one is housing stock, so that's Station 5, and that's about what is your housing stock, in terms of how many what percentage of the housing stock is single families? What percentage is multifamilies? And there's some other things on there too. And then the last one is development constraints and opportunities and trade-offs. And and I don't want to forget, you don't have to walk all the way over here, Barry. This is the food station, and we'd love not to have to take this home at the end of the night. We have a lot of this stuff in our office, so please do eat. Okay, so Station 1, I'm just going to go over this a little bit, and then I'm going to break you out into these, or let you loose, I guess I should say. So Station 1, where do you live or work in Acton? Self-explanatory. In that station, though, we have what is at the heart of the matter for you when you think about housing in Acton. And this is where we're giving you space in a very unstructured way to just tell us whatever you want to tell us. What is at the heart of the matter for you? Another way to phrase it is, why did you even bother coming here tonight? Why do you care about this? Why do you think it's important enough to spend probably an hour and a half to 2 hours of your time, where I'm sure you have plenty of other things to do? Why are you here, and what's important about this subject? The next station, so Station 2, right here again, we have the information on the HPP, the Housing Production Plan, but we're asking you with these Post-it notes, you can take a Post-it note in the middle, pen, what do you hope the Housing Production Plan will achieve? And you can answer in any way you want. You can say, I hope it prevents more 40Bs. You can say, I hope it gives us a really thoughtful way to approach housing development in our community. You can say whatever you want. What do you hope it will achieve? The next station, number 3, how is the Acton population changing? The question that we're asking you there is, we'd like you to look at those changes, and we, copied those graphs again that Liz had in her presentation, and tell us what recent population changes that we're seeing in the data surprised you. I mean, most of you live here, and you know a lot of people in the community, and how many of you have been here longer than, let's say, 10 years? Raise your hand. Okay, so a lot of the data goes back at least 10 years, right? So we have a lot of 2010 to 2018, a look at what's changed. I'd love to hear from your perspective if your experience on the ground is matching up with what the data is showing. Have you seen these changes? Have you felt, have you felt these changes? And what surprised you? And it could be sometimes, this data is estimates too. Some of it's estimates. So some of it might, there's margins of errors on all of this stuff. So some of it may actually not be completely reflective of what's going on the ground. So if that's the case for you and you feel like, well, I'm surprised by this because I don't think it's true, then that's the kind of thing I want to hear from you, okay? Okay, the next station, the question we're asking is, so this is about affordability and who can afford to live in Acton, that's the data we have up there. What efforts should Acton focus on, do you think, Acton should focus on to address the affordability gap for low-income residents? Now, you might say, well, I don't think Acton should do a darn thing about it because I don't believe in that kind of interference with whatever it is. You could also say that I'm very concerned about this affordability gap because it's really affecting the people who are living here, whatever you want. I'm just telling you that we're not guiding your opinion on this. We're asking questions that will inform the way we write up the strategies and the housing production plan. And then the last station, station 5. This is about housing types. What types of housing would you like to see built to help Acton achieve the 10% affordability goal? We have to know what you think about this because the housing production plan, we are required by the state to show how Acton eventually, over time, will meet that 10% goal. And so we think it's really important to ask you, as residents, community members, well, how do you think that goal should be reached over time? And we're asking you about types of housing. And the reason we ask you about types of housing is because, different housing types, single family, for example, will have different effects on the community than other housing types that are more dense. There are lots of, just list a few just to give you in your mind what I'm thinking of. Certain types use more land, take up more room to house the same number of people. Certain types are inherently more expensive than other types. Certain types can be designed in certain ways that you may be familiar with certain developments, and let's say you like some of the townhouse developments you've seen, or maybe you are intrigued by more co-housing. So that's why we're asking you about what types of housing do you think should be focused on to try to meet that 10% goal. Okay, now the last station may be the most interesting. We have a bunch of things there. One is that board that Barry's standing right next to, and it gives you a whole bunch of maps that the planning department, and I think, Barry, did you do some of those? Those are all planning department, okay. Planning department put together, and they show you development constraints and opportunities. And Barry, could you just remind me what constraints are on there?
So we have floodplains, historic districts, groundwater protection, publicly owned land, and sewers.
Okay, so we're showing you some constraints and opportunities in terms of infrastructure opportunities. And the next thing that Barry's standing in front of, that map on the table, it's basically a base map. It shows where open space is and maybe a few other things. Streets are on there. And what we're asking you, and this is an activity that you'll do with those little teeny stickers again, so hopefully people weren't finding them too hard to handle, because I know they're very small. But there's 4 colors, and each one represents a different housing type. I think, what do we have? Yellow is single family. What are the other colors?
Blue is two-family, green is cottage or cluster, and red is multifamily.
Okay, so we just did very broad categories, and we know there's lots of flavors of multifamily, just as there's lots of flavors of cluster and cottage, just as there's lots of flavors of what is a single-family house in terms of what it looks like and how much we like it. So we know that this is broad, but what we want to get a sense of is more the geography of things. So we provided a map and the colored stickers. We're just asking you, where should new housing be built? And using those colored stickers to say, well, what kinds of housing do you think would be appropriate at these areas? And so this is probably the hardest one for people to do. I don't know, raise your hand if you think that this is going to be a hard one to do. Yeah, some of you do. Raise your hand if you feel like I kind of know some things I want to put on there right now. Okay, good. So there's a little bit of a mix. And then we're also asking, as part of that, in this board right here, we are asking Use the Post-it notes again. On the left, we say, how might new development affect Acton, either positively or negatively? And if you could think of both positive and negative things, that would be very helpful to us. And then we also say, in terms of any potential negative impacts, what should be done to mitigate any potential negative impacts? And those are the questions that we're asking. And so, as I mentioned when I started out, you are very welcome to leave. I really appreciate your time, and I feel like when I go out to a community meeting and I'm not working, I want to sort of give my input, and then I'm kind of ready to leave. I want to go home and see my kids, and like maybe I'll see them before they go to sleep. So I will respect that if you also want to leave. But if you do want to stay till the end, when things are kind of wrapping up with people, or by 8:45 at the very latest, I'll hear report outs, just a little bit, from what each station kind of heard, some of the summaries. But just know that we will be typing up every single Post-it note that you write. So do please make sure we can read your handwriting. That's a problem we have sometimes. But we do our very best to type up every single comment, and there will be a document that summarizes, and it's really a transcription of everything everybody wrote on these boards tonight. And that's it. Any questions about the structure or what we're asking you to do? Nancy?
So you want everybody to pick up a pad and a pen?
Exactly. Everybody can pick up a pad and a pen, and if there are not enough pads, what you can do is just rip them, because you actually won't need a whole pad, I don't think. So just you can rip them in half and give them to someone if we run out. Yes?
When and where will that document that you just...
Yes. We usually get it done in about a week to 2 weeks, depending on how many comments and how long it takes us to type it all up. And then we want the town to just review it to make sure that they agree with the way we're summarizing it. So I would say within about 3-ish weeks, we should be able to get it done and up on the website. Okay? Yes?
I'm a little confused about that question about where housing should be built. Is there an assumption that housing must be built? I'm assuming there might be people here who think...
Yeah, it's a good question.
I want housing to be built.
Right.
So where does that
So the assumption is that in order to make the 10%, so the plan is required to demonstrate how Acton plans to create, at least 10% of its housing stock as affordable. Now, I suppose you could have a strategy saying we want to turn as many existing units into affordable housing as possible. The reality is that it's not realistic to think you're going to get that many units without building. So in order to demonstrate to the state that you have a plan to create the 10% eventually, we need to understand where new housing would be built and in what form. Okay, yes?
So you told us that 657 units were subsidized housing.
Liz, I may need your help for this.
Can you tell us how many other units there are in town that are actually occupied by people who are not, who are affordable?
Oh, yeah.
The lowercase a.
Actually, I don't know the number, but I know how to figure it out. So if you take the number of affordable units that are, and actually, you'd need the number of actual affordable units. That's what you want to know?
That's what I want to know.
Oh, okay, then I misunderstood your question.
How many affordable units are there that are not already on the subsidized housing inventory?
Oh, I see. So how many existing market rate units that people don't pay more than 30% of their income towards? Okay. We kind of know that because we know the inverse of that, right? Because we know how many units are paying over 30,
Well, I think it would be.
or households, rather.
Can I go back a little bit?
Yeah,
It'd be the cost burden, the non-cost burden
Yeah.
people. Right,
yeah, exactly. People who are not cost burden.
right. Here we go, right here. So the large blue bars talk about how many people are not spending more than 30% of their housing. So how many people are in housing that is affordable to them? Now, people in that blue bar are making all sorts of kind of money though,
Yeah.
right? So we
That's
don't,
what I'm asking.
okay.
What I'm asking is, how many units are there that are not, that would actually be affordable by low and moderate income people, but are not currently on this list of the subsidized housing inventory?
Low and moderate income people are staying.
houses that are less than that.
Yeah.
Low income, it's not spending less than 30, more than 30%, that's the number.
How many cheap houses, how many affordable places are there that are not already?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking is how many naturally lower priced units are there that are not restricted?
Yeah.
Right, so that's irrespective of who's living there. And I think that we could see that a little bit on this chart, the gray chart. So we could see here how many homes were sold for less than 400,000.
You don't have rent.
We don't have rents.
That's the issue.
Okay, no, I don't show the rental here.
So presumably most, the low income places that would be attractive to low income people, many of them would be rentals, so that's not going to answer my question.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I don't see how you can make the statement that you made a moment ago, that it's not practical to convert existing.
Yeah, it's a good,
You know, the number
right.
that is asked for.
It's usually not practical because it's very expensive to buy out, basically. So if you have, let's say you have an apartment complex, that's actually market rate, there's no housing affordability restrictions, and the rents happen to be low, you would have to go through a process of actually working with the property owner or purchasing that building and restricting all of those units in order to get them to be on the subsidized housing inventory. I'm really oversimplifying this, but the idea that you would be able to do that for enough properties, have willing, like what's the motivation for the property owner to do that? Number one, what's the financial motivation? And where does all that money come from? Because there's not a market that would happen naturally. It would probably need to be through public subsidies. And if you don't have enough willing owners to make that kind of deal, because they're running along just fine, right? They're happy with the rents they're offering. Maybe they're not putting a lot of money into the property. Maybe that's why the rents are low. I don't know why the rents are low naturally. There's a reason they're low naturally, because if they could, they'd probably get higher rents. But by putting restrictions on them, then they have no choice in the future. They actually have to keep those low. So it's really about how realistic is it to use public subsidy to make deals using existing buildings. It's not that it's impossible to do that here and there, but to get to the 10% number, I would argue would be unrealistic to think that you're going to get totally there just by trying to work with those property owners of the existing buildings. I do want to get the people into their groups. Do you want to answer? I'm sorry.
I'm happy to answer it off to the side.
Yeah.
Because I actually did a project like that in Austin Brighton. It was tremendously
Good.
expensive and difficult, but we did it.
Yeah. Okay, let's get you.
I just
Oh,
wanted to say
sorry.
one thing, that you're looking for about 200 permanently restricted units to get to that 10%. So in terms of how many units is it now, and I say about because the census coming up in 2020 will change that number. Right now, the number is 191, maybe it goes up to 225, but that's kind of the number that we're talking about. So while that strategy might work for some smaller number of units, it's not really going to probably get you to that whole amount. Yeah, okay.
Okay, let's take the rest offline. I'm sorry, I know it's disappointing, but I also don't want to keep people here later than I need to. So go on, do your thing, and then you can let me know when you're done.